At Gate C12, a quiet elderly man in a pressed sports coat stood confused, holding two boarding passes, one for first class, the other for a cramped economy middle seat. His name was Colonel Robert Bob Gaines, 85, a Medal of Honor recipient on his way to Washington, D.C., for a White House ceremony honoring American heroes. The downgrade came without warning or compassion, just a gate agent reciting policy like a machine. The first-class seat had been a gift from his granddaughter, a young Army captain who had pooled her miles and savings to ensure he traveled in comfort. Now he sat quietly by the window, watching others board while clutching the new flimsy pass for seat 32B. He said nothing, but the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable. Then, just 8 minutes later, the terminal shifted. Edward Langston, the president of Transnation Airlines, arrived in a near sprint with his top executives, urgently demanding, "Where is Colonel Gaines?" What followed was a rare moment of corporate humility. Langston knelt beside Bob, apologized personally, and escorted him to seat 1A. He vowed that Bob and his family would fly free for life. It wasn't about luxury, it was about respect. The kind too often forgotten until it's forced to be remembered. When an airline forgot what honor meant, a Medal of Honor, Recipient reminded them. At 85 years old, Colonel Robert Bob Gaines wasn't expecting fanfare. He'd long grown used to moving quietly through crowded places, often overlooked despite the small gold medal tucked deep in his wallet, the Medal of Honor he had received decades ago for his valor in Vietnam. That morning, he was traveling to Washington, D.C. for a White House event honoring men like him. His granddaughter, an Army captain herself, had booked him a first-class seat, 2A, using her saved-up frequent flyer miles and what little money she had to spare. She wanted him to travel in comfort, especially with his back pain from old war wounds. He arrived early, as he always did, and waited patiently in the priority line at Gate C12. But when he handed his boarding pass to the gate agent, Brenda, her expression tightened. Without meeting his eyes, she tapped furiously at her keyboard and then handed him a new boarding pass. "Sorry, sir. Equipment change. You've been reassigned to 32B middle seat. Economy." Bob looked down at the new pass, then back at her. "There must be a mistake," he said softly. "This ticket was confirmed months ago." Brenda shrugged. "Aircraft changes happen. Seat assignments aren't guaranteed." No explanation, no sympathy, not even a hint of the courtesy one might expect for a man who had risked his life for his country. Bob walked away and took a seat near the gate, his Medal of Honor unmentioned, the first-class seat gone. But the moment wasn't about comfort. It was about something deeper: respect, dignity, gratitude, things that don't come with loyalty programs or priority tags. Then he remembered a card his granddaughter had tucked into his wallet, a special number for the airline's Hero Liaison desk. He had almost tossed it away, figuring it would be just another layer of bureaucracy. But with nothing to lose, he dialed. To his surprise, a calm voice answered after just 2 rings. "Transnation Airlines Hero Liaison. This is David." Bob explained his situation, briefly, clearly. No anger, just facts. David listened, asked for his booking code and gate number, then replied, "Colonel Gaines, please stay at the gate. This is being escalated to the highest level immediately." Bob wasn't sure what that meant. Probably nothing. But 8 minutes later, the terminal changed. A small entourage appeared, walking with purpose. At the front was Edward Langston, the CEO of Transnation Airlines. His suit was rumpled, his forehead beaded with sweat. He wasn't flanked by PR handlers, just his top executives. They went straight to Bob. "Colonel Gaines," Langston said, kneeling slightly beside the seated veteran, "I am deeply sorry. What happened was a complete failure of our values and our protocol. It will be corrected, right now." Langston then made a public announcement in front of stunned passengers and gate agents. "This man is a Medal of Honor recipient. His granddaughter booked him a first-class seat so he could attend a White House ceremony. Instead, he was quietly pushed to the back of the plane. Not under my watch." Without hesitation, Langston reassigned Bob to seat 1A and offered him lifetime complimentary first-class travel for him and his family. He even declared that if a seat had to be bumped, "I'll take coach myself." Then, with a look that could chill glass, he turned to Brenda. "You and I," he said, "will be having a discussion about what the word hero means." The story didn't stay quiet. Passengers had filmed the exchange. The video went viral. Veterans groups across the country shared it. The Callahan Protocol, as it came to be known, was implemented at Transnation Airlines, requiring immediate senior-level review for any incident involving distinguished veterans. Bob made it to the ceremony on time, seated comfortably in 1A. He never told his granddaughter about the downgrade. He didn't want to tarnish her gift. When she heard about it later through her military circles and called in concern, he just chuckled. "Just a little turbulence at the gate, sweetheart. Nothing a few good people couldn't smooth out." Because in the end, honor isn't about comfort. It's about standing up when it matters. Whether on a battlefield or at a boarding gate, a Medal of Honor, a missed seat, and the moment an airline remembered what respect meant. At 85, Colonel Richard "Rick" Halstead had grown used to moving through life with quiet dignity. He didn't seek recognition or special treatment, even though decades ago his actions on a battlefield had earned him the Medal of Honor. The citation, creased and yellowing, still lived in his wallet, a reminder of a day in Vietnam when he ran through gunfire to drag wounded soldiers to safety. That morning, Colonel Halstead arrived early at the airport, ticket in hand. His granddaughter, Captain Emily Halstead, had spent months saving up her frequent flyer miles and dipping into her own salary to book him a first-class seat, 2A, for a White House ceremony honoring living Medal of Honor recipients. With back pain and aging joints, Rick needed the comfort, and Emily wanted him to arrive rested and respected. But when he stepped up to the gate podium, something felt off. The gate agent, Brenda, typed quickly, frowning at her monitor. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, slipping into the well-rehearsed tone of indifference. "Due to an aircraft change, your seat has been reassigned. You'll now be in 32B Economy Middle." Rick blinked, caught off guard. "This ticket was confirmed months ago. I'm attending a ceremony for Medal of Honor recipients." Brenda didn't even glance at the documents in his hand. "Seat assignments aren't guaranteed, sir. Your ticket was booked using partner miles, and our policy prioritizes Diamond Elite members for reseating." There was no apology, no exception, just a dismissal. Rick accepted the flimsy boarding pass and stepped aside, his dignity intact but bruised. He sat quietly, watching families board while announcements called for first-class passengers, a painful irony. It wasn't about luxury, and it never had been. It was about respect. Then he remembered the card Emily had tucked into his wallet, Transnation Airlines Hero Liaison Desk. "If anything goes wrong, Grandpa," she'd told him, "call this number. No robots, no runarounds." With nothing left to lose, Rick made the call. 2 rings later, a voice answered, "This is David, Hero Liaison." "How can I assist you?" Rick calmly explained. His situation, his ticket, the gate agent's dismissal. Within minutes, David confirmed the booking, recognized the mistake, and escalated the issue to executive leadership. "Colonel Halstead," he said, "please remain at the gate. Someone will be with you shortly." Exactly 8 minutes later, Gate C12 went silent. Striding down the concourse came a small group in suits, led by none other than Edward Sterling, the CEO of Transnation Airlines. He looked flushed, anxious, and determined. "Where is Colonel Halstead?" he demanded. Brenda pointed with a trembling hand toward Rick, who was sitting quietly by the window. Sterling walked straight to him, knelt slightly, and said, "Colonel, I'm so sorry. What happened today was not only unacceptable, it was shameful. You are a national hero, and our airline failed to treat you as such." He ordered immediate reconfiguration of the first-class cabin and offered to give up his own seat if needed. "You will fly to Washington in the dignity you deserve," he said, "and from now on, your travel with us and your granddaughters will always be first class. Complimentary. For life." Brenda was reassigned to a non-customer-facing role. Her supervisor was retrained, and within 24 hours, the airline instituted a new policy, the Halstead Protocol, a top-level response protocol for any incident involving Medal of Honor recipients. Rick boarded his flight in Seat 1A. Another passenger gave up their seat without hesitation. He never told Emily what had happened. "Just a hiccup at the gate," he told her later. "Handled by good people." But word got out. Veterans networks across the country lit up with the story. And for once, an airline wasn't criticized. It was applauded for how it responded when a mistake was made. Rick arrived in Washington, not just rested, but reminded that sometimes, in a world of automation and cold policies, honor still has a place. Middle seat? How a Medal of Honor recipient got the respect he deserved. Just 8 minutes too late. At 85 years old, Colonel Robert Bob Mercer carried his years like a true veteran, quietly, with dignity, and without expectation. He wasn't one to talk about the war. The Medal of Honor he received for rescuing fellow soldiers under enemy fire in Vietnam was rarely mentioned. The citation stayed tucked in his wallet, behind old family photos and his veteran's ID. On this morning, Bob was headed to Washington, D.C. for a White House ceremony honoring Medal of Honor recipients. His granddaughter, Captain Laura Mercer, had pulled together airline miles, savings, and all her love to book him a first-class ticket on Transglobal Airlines. Seat 2A. She wanted her grandfather to fly in comfort and arrive rested. His back pain and old injuries had gotten worse in recent years, and she didn't want him suffering through a cramped trip. Bob arrived at Gate C12 early, as usual. He stood patiently in line, first-class ticket in hand. But when he reached the gate, things unraveled. "I'm sorry, sir," the gate agent said, barely looking up. "Due to an equipment change, you've been moved to seat 32B in economy." Bob blinked. "That must be a mistake. I've had this ticket for months. My granddaughter booked it so I could attend a Medal of Honor event." "Rules are rules," the agent replied flatly. "Your seat was booked with miles, so you lost your first-class spot. Diamond Elite passengers come first in reseating." Bob quietly nodded and took the new boarding pass. 32B middle seat. No apologies, no exceptions, just quiet humiliation in front of a crowded gate. He found a chair nearby and sat in silence, the sounds of boarding announcements blurring in the background. It wasn't about the seat. It was about the principle, about respect. That's when he remembered the card Laura had slipped into his wallet. "Heroes Liaison Desk, Transglobal Airlines." She had said, "If anything goes wrong, Grandpa, don't argue. Just call this number." So he did. 2 rings later, a man named David answered. Calm, professional, listening carefully as Bob explained the situation. "Colonel Mercer, please stay at the gate. I'm escalating this to executive leadership immediately," David said. Bob wasn't sure what to expect. He'd seen enough policy and procedure in his day to know not to get his hopes up. But exactly 8 minutes later, the gate area erupted in whispers. A group of executives rushed toward Gate C12. At the front was Edward Sterling, president and CEO of Transglobal Airlines, sweating despite the air conditioning. 2 vice presidents flanked him. The crowd froze as Sterling scanned the waiting area. "Where is Colonel Robert Mercer?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. Bob slowly raised his hand. Sterling rushed over, crouched slightly, and said, "Sir, I am deeply sorry. You were failed today. By our staff, by our system, by our values. I am here to correct that." He personally reinstated Bob's first-class seat, 1A, and promised that Bob and his granddaughter would fly first class for life, free of charge. "You deserve that, and so much more," Sterling said. Brenda, the gate agent who had brushed Bob off, turned pale. Sterling's gaze didn't miss a beat. "We'll be having a long discussion about what Hero's Liaison actually means after this plane is in the air." Bob was quietly escorted onto the plane. Another passenger, overhearing the story, gave up their seat without hesitation. And as Bob settled into 1A, flight attendants greeted him with newfound reverence, not because of his medal, but because his story had finally been seen. Transglobal Airlines later instituted the Mercer Protocol, a policy ensuring that no Medal of Honor recipient would ever be treated with anything less than full respect again. Bob never mentioned the incident to his granddaughter. "Just a hiccup," he told her when she asked. But across veteran forums, military circles, and social media, the story of the man in 32B spread like wildfire. Not because of outrage, but because it proved something simple and enduring. Dignity matters. And it's never too late to do the right thing. He only wanted a quiet flight. What he got was an apology heard around the nation. At 85 years old, Colonel Walter "Walt" Granger didn't expect much from the world anymore. A retired Marine and recipient of the Medal of Honor, Walt had long ago made peace with being overlooked, especially in places like airports, where patience wore thin and people scrolled more than they looked up. But on that day, what started as quiet dismissal turned into something no one at Gate C12 would forget. Walt was headed to Washington, D.C. for a ceremony honoring Medal of Honor recipients. His granddaughter, Lieutenant Rebecca Granger, had saved up for months to buy him a first-class ticket. She knew the toll time and service had taken on his body. A bad back from parachute landings, a limp that never healed right, and the lingering shadows of the jungle he never talked about. He arrived early, seat 2A, confirmed and printed. He waited politely in line at the gate. But then the words came, cold and rehearsed. "We've had an equipment change," said Brenda, the gate agent. "You've been reassigned to seat 32B economy, middle seat." Walt blinked. "There must be a mistake. My ticket was confirmed. My granddaughter bought it with miles for a White House event." Brenda shrugged. "Policy says partner miles rank lower than paying customers. Diamond Elite comes first." No apology, no empathy, just a flippant response in front of dozens of fellow travelers pretending not to hear. So Walt took his flimsy boarding pass and sat down quietly, listening as others were welcomed into the first-class cabin he no longer belonged to. He wasn't upset about the legroom or the meal. It was the principle. He opened his wallet and found the small card Rebecca had slipped inside. "If anything goes wrong," she had told him, "call this number. It's the Hero's Liaison line. They promise to take care of you." Walt hesitated, then dialed. A calm voice answered. "Hero's Liaison Desk, this is David." Within minutes, David had heard Walt's story and assured him that things would be handled at the highest level. Walt didn't expect much, but 8 minutes later, something extraordinary happened. A rush of footsteps echoed through the terminal. Suits, ties, and urgency. At the center of the storm stood Edward Sterling, president of Transglobal Airlines, red-faced and out of breath. "Where is Colonel Granger?" he called out. Walt raised a hand. Sterling approached with visible shame. "Sir, we failed you. Plain and simple. What happened today was a disgrace to your service, to our protocols, and to common decency." He immediately reinstated Walt's first-class seat, and then added, "From this moment forward, all travel by you and your granddaughter with Transglobal will be complimentary. That's the very least we can do." He turned to Brenda, the gate agent. "We'll be having a conversation about what it means to serve those who've already served." Walt was escorted onto the plane, placed in seat 1A, and treated like the hero he was. A fellow passenger volunteered their seat without being asked. But the story didn't end there. Transglobal Airlines launched the Granger Protocol within 48 hours, mandating that all veterans, especially Medal of Honor recipients, receive priority service and human-centered treatment, regardless of fare class. Brenda was moved to a non-customer-facing position. Mark, the younger gate agent who had looked uneasy during the initial confrontation, was later commended for reporting what had happened. The story spread through veteran networks and news outlets, sparking national conversation about how we treat those who've sacrificed for our freedoms. Walt never told his granddaughter the full story. When she asked about the trip, he just smiled and said, "Little turbulence at the gate, nothing I couldn't handle." But for those at Gate C12, and the thousands who read the story later, it was a reminder of something deeper. Respect isn't reserved for the young or the wealthy. It's owed to those who've already given the best years of their lives so the rest of us could live ours in peace. He didn't raise his voice, but the nation heard him loud and clear. Colonel Walter Granger never expected much from airline travel. At 85, with a stiff back and decades of military service behind him, all he asked for was the first-class seat his granddaughter had lovingly arranged so he could attend a Medal of Honor ceremony in Washington, D.C. But instead of respect, he received a boarding pass for a cramped economy middle seat, without apology, without consideration. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just sat down quietly, holding a worthless ticket and the weight of being forgotten. But 8 minutes later, everything changed. Not because he demanded it, but because someone finally listened. The airline's president appeared in person, breathless and apologetic, and issued a correction that rippled across the nation. The Granger Protocol was born, ensuring no decorated veteran would be dismissed again. Sometimes it's not volume that commands attention. It's quiet dignity. It's honor that refuses to be diminished. True honor doesn't need to shout. It simply stands tall, even when seated. And sometimes, the quiet strength of a man who's given everything is enough to bring a corporation to its knees. Have you ever witnessed silent dignity make the loudest impact? Share your story in the comments. And if you believe heroes like Colonel Granger deserve more than a seat, they deserve our thanks, hit subscribe. Let's keep these stories alive.